Hello, and welcome to this episode of the Fortnightly Dispatch, brought to you by the Baker Street Irregulars. My name is Steve Doyle, and I'm your host. You know, in our hobby, many of us, if not most of us, consider ourselves to be Sherlockians. But in our hobby, there's a subset that actually consider themselves to be more Doyleans than Sherlockians, meaning their interest is broader than just Sherlock Holmes and expands out to Arthur Conan Doyle, the author of the Sherlock Holmes stories. Today, I am very excited to welcome two guests to our show who are the foremost Doylean authors and scholars in our field. I'm very happy to welcome Roy Pilot and Doug Elliott to the show today. Roy is the, where do I start? Roy is the co-author, co-annotator of the definitive edition of The Lost World. He was the co-editor with this, along with Dr. Al Roden back in the 1990s. And he is also the co-annotator and editor of the Annotated White Company, recently released, which is the sort of the definitive edition of this outstanding novel. And his collaborator on that work was Doug Elliott. Doug is a tremendous Sherlockian and Doylean. Doug is the author of this work called The Curious Incident of the Missing Link, which recounts the proposed scandal around Arthur Conan Doyle and the Piltdown Man. It's worth reading. This thing really excited me when I first read it back in the 1990s. And of course, Roy Pilot also is not just a Doylean. He is a Sherlockian. He was the co-editor on the Baker Street Irregulars Manuscript edition, Mandate for Murder, a tremendous work back a few years ago. Find yourself a copy of it. And it's a very great treat for me to welcome them both to the show. Doug, Roy, I want to welcome you to the show. This is a great treat. Welcome to the Fortnightly Dispatch.
Thank you for having us.
Including us. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you.
So I'm telling you, the technology here is an amazing thing because, Roy, I know where you are. Tell us where you're coming to us from.
I live just outside of Detroit, Michigan, in a little city called Dearborn Heights. You've been to the house, so you know where I'm at.
You were relatively neighbors.
I think I was missing one of my books when you left last time. So.
Oh, only one? Okay, good. And then Doug. Now, Doug, where are you coming to us from?
Well, I'm in Sydney, Australia, or a northern beaches suburb thereof.
So, Doug, you're coming to us halfway around the world or more. So, hey, viewers, Doug is coming to us from tomorrow. So,
well, yeah, and Steve and Roy, thank you for accommodating my waking and sleeping times by scheduling this at a civilized hour.
I have to go to bed pretty soon now because it's getting late for me.
All right, well, let's dive in. So, you're the first. This is the first show where we have featured two guests at a time, and the reason for that is because I obviously I have reasons to think of you guys as collaborators, which you are, and so I wanted to sort of interview you in tandem because I know that your work is intertwined in many ways. So another reason I wanted to talk to you guys is because we've talked a lot on this series now about Sherlock Holmes, and we've talked about the Baker Street Irregulars and our Sherlockian community. but we haven't really talked that much about Arthur Conan Doyle. And a lot of your work has had to do with the creator rather than the creation. And so I wanted to talk to you guys for that reason as well. Plus, you're friends, so that's good too. So, what in your mind, how do you think of yourselves? Are you Doyleans? Are you Sherlockians? Is there a distinction? How do you guys think about that?
Well, I think I'm a Doylean in the morning and a Sherlockian in the afternoon. Actually, I don't know. I'm a bit of both, I guess. And I have a particular affection for Conan Doyle and his non-Sherlockian work, as well as obviously the Sherlock. So yeah, I've never really labeled myself that way.
How about you, Roy? How do you do you draw a distinction, or is it all just one big thing?
I think when I first started becoming involved with this Sherlockian Doylean world, I had a tendency to think of myself more as a Doylean, because my experience was that I had read Sherlock Holmes books, but never associated an author with Sherlock Holmes. And when I finally, I have a Collier's magazine from 1953 that was, done by Adrian Conan Doyle. I thought they were they were the authors of the Sherlock Holmes stories, and I thought those were Sherlock Holmes stories. Now that gives you some idea of my understanding of authors. I think though that the moment that I really knew that there was somebody writing these was when I was presented with a book for Christmas called The Exploits of Brigadier Gerard, and the author was a fellow named Conan Doyle, and it was a footnote on this that he had written some Sherlock Holmes stories. That was the moment that I said, I don't know that much about Sherlock Holmes right now, and I've read all the stories, and I know Basil Rathbone, blah, blah, blah. Isn't it time I found out who this fella is that wrote this thing? Because I read the exploits, I said, this guy's got, quite talented, this Doyle fella. So that's where I began and you cannot separate them. And, as time goes on, you'll remember that the events that started with the 70s with Nicholas Myers and the 7% Saloon exploded the Sherlockian world. And then you really began to find Sherlockian, a great throng of people into the Sherlockian world. And again, Doyle was sort of removed a little bit. So my original intent was I may be one of the few people that wants to resurrect Conan Doyle as the writer. That changed over the years, obviously. But I went on a crusade. I bought everything when I was not even knew what to do. Anything that had Conan Doyle on it, any work, I had at one time probably 50 different copies of all the third-rate, fourth-rate, fifth-rate Conan Doyle books that were ever written for 50 cents. I thought I was a great collector. And then one day,
wait a minute, that's what I have.
Well, one day I was taken under the wing by a real collector, and he taught me the ins and outs. And let me tell you what I did. The minute I realized what a mistake I had made, I bundled up 40 of those books and gave them to a library, and I started out with 10 books and went from there. So and my collection is eclectic because I have a lot of Sherlockian material, but I also have more Doylean material.
Yeah, I know you. But you, Doug, do you collect? Or are you just not? Are you a collector in that kind of sense?
I wouldn't call myself a capital C collector. I think, my introduction to Holmes goes back to 1976, I think, when I was living in Sydney, and I picked up a book, just something to read on the train when I was commuting. And it kind of grew exponentially from there. We moved to Toronto, and my wife gave me, for 1979 for Christmas, she gave me a year's membership to the Bootmakers, which is the Toronto Sherlockian Society. And I have never looked back, as it turns out. And from then on, I've started, as I was introduced into the Sherlockian world, I started collecting little bits and pieces of what I could afford, some of which were books, some of which, well, there's one. You may be familiar with the famous Oscar Meunier bust of Holmes that
Oh, yes.
was available to select people depending on who you knew at the time. So I managed to get one of those things. And I bought a, in '89, there was a Christie's auction, I think, of a bunch of Sherlockian stuff. And I bought a box of Lost World editions, miscellaneous, film things and so on. And this is probably the rattiest copy of The Lost World in existence, except for one little bonus up in the top above the title that says, "Yours very truly, Arthur Conan Doyle." And I don't know if you can see it. So that was kind of, for a book that you would otherwise throw away. So every once in a while, I've found little gems like that. And I gradually became just as interested in the author as the detective along the way.
Well, that's something that's happened in this show. I never really planned it, but people show off these amazing treasures and yes, very nice. Very nice.
Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. So
Well, I
let's
think I could probably spend a couple of days from the looks of things, in your library and examining little treasures that you have as well.
Well, we all have stuff, Yeah. That doesn't make me not want your stuff.
Oh, okay.
That's terrible, but it's true. Okay, so let's talk about what I just want to, in the introduction, I mentioned that you guys have written numerous things. Like Doug, I'm just going to kind of take a moment here to kind of show off for you guys, all right? So Doug, as an example of some of the Sherlockian writing that you guys have done, Doug has written something that really kind of, just so you know, really kind of lit me up when I read it. It's The Curious Incident of the Missing Link, published by the Bootmakers of Toronto. And it's all about the discovery of the Piltdown Man and Conan Doyle's sort of association with it and that sort of thing. Why don't you tell us a little bit about that, Doug?
Yeah, well, in 1983, in a popular science magazine, there was an article that said that accused Arthur Conan Doyle of committing the famous Piltdown Man hoax. So Piltdown Man was a...
Boy, has it right there.
There you go, Science 83, that's the magazine. Piltdown Man was, back in 1912, was a fossil, a human fossil that was discovered by a well-regarded English amateur archaeologist and anthropologist, and he claimed that this was a new type of human, a new twig on the human family tree. And this whole thing went on for 40 years before somebody in the 1950s from the British Museum kind of twigged that this particular fossil didn't fit into the growing picture of how humanity had evolved. And so they looked at it a little more closely, and they discovered that, in fact, the whole thing had been fabricated, and the skull, and I have an example here. So this is the bits that were found, the black bits of the actual fossil that was discovered. And
pull it a little closer to you so we can see it better.
Sorry about this. Sorry, the black bits are the fossil parts. This is a reconstruction, obviously, and the white bits are the reconstructed filling in pieces. So essentially, they found fragments of the skull and such sort of half the jaw and one tooth and so on. When you knew that it was a hoax, it was pretty obvious. It was a pretty crude fake.
So this was found near Conan Doyle's home, though, right?
It was. That was part of the theory that Conan Doyle had done it. He lived something like 10 miles away from the site that it was found, and he was interested in fossils and blah blah blah. And so these writers concocted this elaborate theory that Arthur Conan Doyle, because he was a spiritualist and he hated scientists, the materialists, he concocted this thing to get back at them in some way, to show nobody was defending Conan Doyle that I could see. A bunch of scientists had written into this magazine saying, boy, that was a stupid theory and there's no basis for it and so on. And so I decided that I would take this theory apart piece by piece and see if I could refute or maybe support. For all I knew, it was true. And if I dug into it, I might find out that it was true. But the more I dug into it, the more I found that the evidence was non-existent, and it really looked like the authors had some sort of an axe to grind and just wanted to get some publicity. So that's where that little red book came from back in 1989.
If you can find a copy of this, everybody, it's really a great read and super interesting, and yeah, one of my favorites.
Thank you.
And that you're welcome. And that interest in fossils kind of was true, and it kind of carried over and was kind of, Roy, would you say that his interest in paleontology and archaeology and that sort of thing sort of fueled his interest in writing his great dinosaur epic, The Lost World?
Well, yes.
By the way, Roy is the co-editor. Well, just so we get this out there, I mentioned this in the intro, but here it is. Roy, along with Dr. Al Roden, edited and annotated the annotated Lost World back in the 90s, the definitive edition of The Lost World. So that's why I'm asking you this question, Roy. So,
well, Doyle was interested in the whole story of the genesis of the Lost World. Has many parts, and one of them was his interested in I would say paleontology, but he did some field trips and had some bones in his office. I think Doyle, the story of the writing of the Lost World, it takes a life of its own, because Doyle was interested in explorations. He was interested in tales that had been told of Mount Roraima, that nobody had climbed this mountain, and it was and the British public was looking for someone to climb a mountain that had never been climbed. And Doyle was an advocate of this, listened to a lecture that we know at the Royal Society, and from there formulated this story of the Lost World. I want to go back just a little bit from that, from the writing of that. For one thing, in the early 80s, I met Dr. Al Roden, who was a BSI and a scholar. And we talked a lot about the Lost World. There was a symposium in Dayton called the Sherlock Holmes Arthur Conan Doyle Symposium, which was held once a year. I met Al on the third visit of that symposium, and that shifted my whole perspective, because it was a dedicated symposium to Sherlock Holmes and Arthur Conan Doyle. You had speakers on both ends. and it motivated me towards Sherlockian as much as it motivated others towards Conan Doyle. One of the things that Al had done before, he had done some annotations on some minor stories. In 1986, Al Roden called me on the phone and said, "Would you be interested in doing a book, or giving a lecture, rather," he said, "on the Lost World," because a new video had come out, which was a VCR of the new 50-minute tape that was supposedly the only copies available of that. And he wanted to show it at the symposium and wanted me to give the lecture.
Of the movie.
He wanted me to give a lecture on the Lost World and show the movie afterwards as entertainment, which they did. He set up at Wright State the TV with the VCR, and I gave the talk. A month after I gave the talk, Al Roden called me and said, "How would you like to do an annotated Lost World?" That was the beginning of a beautiful friendship that Al and I had. We then, did this. Now, based on all the information that we had seen from Doyle's biography and the workings, just the idea of annotating this, Al and I spent 5 years getting this thing together. Remember, and at that time, computers weren't out there. I typed all of the manuscript and everything on a portable typewriter. Al finally got a typewriter, or the new
word processor.
Yeah, it came out, and his wife Jean was doing all this. So it was archaic. And however, all of the information on the genesis of the development of this, it can be found in that story. And it was a sense of kind of pride to us that we were doing a annotated work of one of Doyle's stories that, we had some annotations, obviously, of the stories that came out. It was kind of a fun thing. The only problem that we had was after we finished the manuscript, I sent out 25 letters to various publishers. 5 were kind enough to reject it in a letter. The other 20 never did. And for 2 years, Al and I wondered if we were ever going to find a publisher. Well, it just so happened that one of the dinners Al and I had just finished, and this was 92, and we were sitting at the table saying, what do we do with our manuscript? We were at that point decided that what we should do is make 3 copies, one for the Library of Congress and one for each of us, and we would bind them fine, and that would be it. When 2 gentlemen approached us from the outside of the dining room, and they had been actually attendees, and we knew them. Gentlemen came up to us and said, "Can we talk to you for a minute?" And we said yes. They said, "We are thinking about launching a press. Would you mind if we were to launch it with your Lost World?" Now, Al and I looked at each other, and I remember the expressions because Al was chuckling and I was chuckling. Anyway, we said yes, and Wessex Press was born, and the rest is history. But
so full disclosure.
I'm sorry?
It's full disclosure for our viewers.
Yes, full disclosure.
Yes. So in addition to publishing the Baker Street Journal and doing all kinds of work for the Baker Street Irregulars, I am co-publisher of Wessex Press. I was one of the guys, along with Mark Gagan, who approached Roy and Al Roden about publishing their work. We're getting no money off of it now because it's long out of print. So
Right. Yeah, that's the reason.
we're
That's the
not
reason.
promoting it here.
No, I'm not promoting it. I believe in serendipity and all of these things coming together to make them a lot. And that's the story there.
Yeah, it was a wonderful, amazing day. Um, we've talked about this on other podcasts about how there are moments, where when you're in the moment, you don't even really realize the momentousness of it. But that was certainly one where, it changed everything,
Serendipity is what I call it. It is struck us on me. It changed a lot of events that changed the course of how I approach things. And Doug and I have the same experience, and I think you'll probably get this when we talk about.
Yeah, I want to talk about let's talk about how before we get to your collaboration, let's talk about, you both have written about Doyle extensively. And you both, many Sherlockians just, Doyle's over here, he's just, he's not really a factor in many ways. But you honor the author as well as the work. And so, what is your opinion of Arthur Conan Doyle as a writer, apart from the Sherlock Holmes stories? How do you evaluate Conan Doyle as an author?
I think that in a lot of ways he was a pioneer. His favorite authors, looking at who he thought was great literature, were people like Charles Reade and Walter Scott. But these were authors of Edgar Allan Poe. These were authors that were 50 years before his time. And he was writing what he thought was the same kind of literature, but he was writing it in a, even though it was the late 1890s, he was writing it in what I would call a 20th century style. He called it a surface of ease. And it was a very clean, uncomplicated, straightforward style of language. And so I think literary wise, he was on that cusp between the authors of the 19th century and the authors of the 20th century.
I'm often struck by how readable he is, even now, all these years later. Very modern in style,
Yeah, when you look at the Lost World, for example, the style is very straightforward. When you look at the White Company, which was published in 1891, even though it uses a lot of archaisms and unfamiliar phrases and so on, it still is written in a very straightforward, a clean kind of style when you read it now. So I think that's one of the hallmarks of what makes him a pretty good author.
Yeah. Well, what do you think of him as he had a huge range, didn't he?
That was it. He wrote a lot. When you look at The Lost World, that's a seminal work, okay? And how many authors write seminal works? And when you look at The Poison Belt, you've got another science fiction type thing at a period when, Jules Verne had written a lot of stuff, but this was on a par with Verne as far as the background of the stories and that. And his characters were, he developed three characters that I think indicate his ability to define a character in a story. One, obviously, Sherlock Holmes, Professor Challenger, one of his favorite. And then you have the Brigadier Gerard stories. And I look at the Brigadier Gerard stories as some of the best, the Clouseau of the Napoleon army, okay? Yeah. And before his time, he writes about this. Just in that context, it changed, it makes him an author that you can say, well, he's not straight-laced, and he's got a sense of humor, and he's able to tie all of this in together. The other thing that, of course, we see is that he confined his writings to certain periods. I mean, you have the periods where he's writing Sherlock Holmes, and then he's writing The White Company, and then he's writing a series of Croxley Master, a bunch of other novels up to the turn of the century. Then he moves in to resurrecting Sherlock Holmes, and then he runs the gamut with the science fiction. Not all of his work is there are lapses in it does, but when he gets into the spiritual world, he changes completely. And what you see is a lot of spiritualist writings.
Yeah.
And it's changed the whole scenario, because he does with Challenger something he never did with Arthur Conan Doyle at the moment that he became a spiritualist. Sherlock Holmes stayed true with Sherlock Holmes' reasoning, etc. Challenger, he converts to spiritualism. He only would have done that with somebody he really liked, I think. It was a friend of his, I think. I mean, you disguise and everything. But when I look at my collection, and I'm sure all of us do, that I concentrate, I break down the writings of Doyle into sections, and I have his early runs, then I have his war years, then I have his spiritualist years, and in that you see somebody that life-wise spent the last 12, 13 years of his life as a spiritualist at a time when people were wondering what he was doing. But he became their advocate and died as their advocate. And he made some mistakes, maybe, but he stayed true to his religion.
Hey guys, let's take a break for just a moment. We need to hear from our commercial sponsor.
You should subscribe to the Baker Street Journal because it is the place to learn about what's going on in the world of Sherlock Holmes.
The Baker Street Journal is hands down my favorite Sherlockian thing to read. When it comes in the mail, my night is planned.
The Baker Street Journal is the place to play the game. If you're a Sherlockian, you want to be able to do the game of understanding the times of Sherlock Holmes, the stories of Sherlock Holmes, what Sherlock Holmes is all about.
If you are not a subscriber to the Baker Street Journal, you have no idea what you're missing. This is hands down the best writing about the writings you'll ever find.
You'll find great articles about new discoveries that are being made every single day. But beyond that, you'll find out what other people are doing and how you can become more involved in the world of Sherlock Holmes.
Okay, we're back. Well, what's interesting to me as with him as an author is, okay, so let's think about this a minute. He was a detective story writer. He was a science fiction author. He wrote ghost stories. He wrote
historical
romantic novels, right? He wrote kind of weird tales, pirate stories. I mean, well, it's more like, what didn't he write? Poetry, history.
I don't want to interrupt you, but there is a book that was put out about 25 years ago of the short stories of Arthur Conan Doyle. I don't know if you've got it in his library.
That thick.
That thick, exactly. And the one that always intrigues me is Lot 249.
Oh yeah,
because that was the precursor to The Mummy. That Doyle had wrote a story about mummies and reincarnation before Boris Karloff or Frankenstein and anybody got into the picture.
I think he sort of invented the genre. That and Lost Worlds and dinosaurs and you name it. Well, so let's talk a little bit about I mean, he wanted to be considered a great historical fiction author, right? I mean, that was kind of where he really wanted. He thought that was his best work, And we know that the White Company was. He thought that was the pinnacle of his success. Talk a little bit about the White Company, and then we'll talk about your collaboration and how you guys work together.
First of all, in context, he's a struggling doctor in Southsea in the south of England. He's joined the Portsmouth Literary and Scientific Society to try to get into society a little bit, to become better known and get some patients. And one of the lectures that they gave at the end of 1889 was a professor talked about life in the 14th century, and really made it come to life. And so Conan Doyle said, why don't people write about this rather than your typical dull history books that we learn about in school? Why don't people write about the vital, exciting, very bigger than life kind of world of the 14th century? And so he kind of latched onto that, and by 1890 he was ensconced in a cottage in the New Forest with a stack of reference books, and he had this huge amount of research that he conducted. And gradually the story emerged of a young boy who had been raised in a monastery, who was kicked out of the monastery to find his own way in the world, gradually became a soldier in the army of the Black Prince, the Prince of Wales. This is in 1366, and joined the Prince of Wales campaign from France down into Spain to try to restore one of the kings of Spain to the throne after the throne had been usurped by his brother, and so on. So there was this kind of coming of age / road picture sort of story that Doyle built around this around the world of the 14th century. So that was the book. It was published in 1891. Good reviews. Lots of.
He thought it was his best work, didn't he?
He did. He thought 10 years later, I think he published Sir Nigel, which was the sequel or the prequel, if you like. And he thought those two were the best stuff that he'd ever done. And I think he persisted in that belief for the rest of his life.
Well, they are good. They are. If you haven't read them, give them a shot because they're great.
Yeah.
So you guys worked on an annotated edition of The White Company. How do you guys collaborate? How do you work? How do you do that from Michigan to Australia?
In 1987, when I gave the lecture of The Lost World, the following year I gave a talk on The White Company at the Symposium. And a gentleman got up and said, when are you going to do a White Company? His name was Mark Gagan. And after we got finished our work with The Lost World, Al Roden and I thought about doing the annotated White Company. Now, Al had been to England. He had gathered a lot of information prior to this. And unfortunately, Al Roden developed Alzheimer's and in 1999 passed away. So that meant that I really didn't have a writing partner, but I did know a fella who was a partner in writing, and we had done some work on it. And Doug, you will remember this. We talked about the Piltdown Man. Remember this, Doug? Discovery Magazine?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Discovery Magazine was a California magazine, published a Piltdown pastiche using Sherlock Holmes to prove that Doyle had pilfered the Piltdown, wasn't responsible for it. And so how do you respond to this? Well, here's what happened. I got a call, and this, this was 1996, early, from Tom Sticks, who said, I just saw a magazine where they're using Sherlock Holmes to prove a point on this Piltdown man. What are you going to do about it? Well, I said, what do you mean? He said, somebody's got to write something. So I said,
you mean like the head of the Baker Street Irregulars called you to tell you?
Yeah, right. Now, I was not a BSI, okay? I was not a BSI.
I mean, whatever.
But he knew because of the Lost World, so so here's what happened. I said, okay. And then I said, what better collaborator than the fella that wrote the Piltdown story thing? I called Doug. Doug, you remember this? I said, let's do something with this.
Yeah.
So in his wisdom, Doug said, we'll do a pastiche and we'll use Sherlock Holmes to counter the other Sherlock Holmes. So we gathered a lot of information because by that time I had seen a lot of lots of what was tentatively called the Lost World Manuscript that the New York Public Library held, but it had a lot of notes in it and it had a lot of material that we copied. And to make a long story short, Doug wrote the scenario and we collaborated on each little area that they took as fact and nailed it to the wall with Sherlock Holmes saying you can't do all of this. So that was the collaboration. Now the interesting thing is we had this thing and Tom Sticks wanted it for the 1996 for some reason. So we got it done. And Don Pollock called us and said, Tom said you're going to do this story. Send it to us.
Don was the editor of the Baker Street Journal at the time.
Right. And he said, I don't care how long it is or what it takes, whatever it is, we'll put it. So it appeared then in this issue, December of '96, and pretty much nailed the coffin on all of this. When you talk about how do you do for a number of years since Doug was still living there, I made a lot of trips to his house and he kept me up as a guest and fed me and all this sort of stuff. But we worked, that way. I probably was up at your house 3 or 4 times every year with work, and the stuff piled.
Well, I have a slightly different memory of how that collaboration started. I started going to the BSI dinners from about 1991. And it was easy to get. I lived in Toronto, so it was back and forth. It was pretty easy to get to New York and back on a weekend. And I remember the weekend that the annotated Lost World was published. And I'd known Roy for a couple of years by this time, and I was really happy for him and Al that this had been published, and it was a beautiful edition. It was really nicely produced. And I could also see that Al was struggling if not then shortly thereafter that he was struggling. And I remember Roy coming up to me in the middle of this sort of scrum of Sherlockians at the dealer's room on the weekend and gave me this conspiratorial wink and said, the next project is the White Company and you and I are going to do that together. And they vanished into the crowd at that point. So that was, I think, how, in my mind anyway, that was how the whole idea started. And I absolutely had no hesitation in joining that one, and it was terrific fun.
With Al, never in that period of time did we debate, did we ever get mad at each other or back away. And Doug and I, for 20 years, have been really good friends. We never had issues, and that's the only way you collaborate. And thank God I had Doug. Believe me, Doug, it was a good time. It was the best of times.
I absolutely would second that, and I think it's, if you look at the work or joint works today, it's impossible for me to say I did this and Roy did that, and I mean it's just it was just a happy collection of the both of us working together.
It's great when you have a collaborator that you are in sync with. I mean, I've been blessed to have a good publishing partner at Wessex Press. I have a great partner on the Baker Street Journal with Steve Rothman. And yeah, it's a good thing. When you get it, you hang on to it, you know.
Yeah.
Hang on to it. So it's really good. So, I just, believe it or not, we're getting close to the end of our time. So I want to just sort of I always like to talk to friends who have been in the hobby a long time, and because part of our audience here, I'm learning, is made up of Sherlockians who are, kind of new to the hobby and have perhaps not been in this wonderful hobby for as long as we've been able to enjoy it, and what is this hobby? What's it meant to your guys' life? I've said before on the show that this hobby has sort of shaped and defined my entire adult life, and it's been a real blessing. How do you guys, what is it? What is all this? How has all this been for you guys?
Doug?
Well, first of all, I'd like to acknowledge that Steve, you've said publicly that Roy was a very strong mentor for you in your early days in the BSI and helped you to feel welcome and part of it.
Oh, that's quite true.
And I have exactly the same experience. I remember meeting Roy in the early 90s at one of the BSI receptions when I was feeling a bit lost. And he was just so welcoming and inclusive and engaging that he made me take a second look at that organization and that hobby, and he's been like that for me ever since. So I really want to acknowledge Roy as one of the better types of BSI. So thank you.
I'm right there with you, Doug.
Hey, you're going to bring tears to my eyes, you guys.
Well, Roy, do you remember my first year going to my dinner?
Yeah.
And every kind of mishap on Earth. I'll tell that story sometime on this show. Barely made it there in time, and didn't know anybody but you and Dr. Al Roden. And thank God I knew you guys, because otherwise I would have just thrown in the towel. But that was it. You guys you and Al opened the door to everything there in New York for me that year. And, eternally grateful for that, for sure.
Well, for me, it boils down to what I was saying before. Who would have thought that a little Italian kid raised by a grandmother and grandfather who couldn't speak English, whose first language was Italian, who's would grow up to write anything, when my path was not determined by me. It was determined by events that I either accepted or rejected, but every one that I took led to something that was more fun. Nancy and I have made so many friends in related to this. We used to do a lot of the symposiums when we were younger, and we did a lot of things. This was part of our life. And when we did The Lost World, I wrote to Dame Jean Conan Doyle and asked her at that time, because the copyright was had ended in 87. It was 75 years. it was ended for the copyright, but we didn't want to do anything to offend her. So I met John Lellenberg in Washington, D.C., and asked him if he thought it would be all right for us to do this. And he said, you should write to Dame Jean. So I wrote to Dame Jean. I have the letter here that Dame Jean wrote back telling me how much she appreciated someone writing other than Sherlock Holmes. Now, that was in itself. But the following year, we went to London, and guess who took us out to lunch? And we spent the whole day with Dame Jean Conan Doyle, and I have letters from her. Now, how much better does it get than the daughter of Arthur Conan Doyle writing you and you're corresponding for the rest of her life? And I wouldn't have met any of you guys. Let's face it, you guys. That's Italian talk anyway. But and the friendships that we form. And the funny part of it is, Steve, Mark, all of you, the members, that I've known from our organizations, we are friends. It just, I don't know how else to put it. We have become close friends. We have become a family. I mean, I feel as comfortable with Doug and you as I do with, my cousins, and probably more so than some.
More so.
But it's just the camaraderie. I know you have to make it all yourself because let's face it, I'm not saying that 200 BSIs are all my friends. No, I'm not saying that. But the core of friends I have that made with it are loyal friends, and darn it, you couldn't,
Yeah, that's how I agree. I know exactly what you're saying. My longest standing relationships, my longest standing friendships, the ones that mean the most to me, have all been a gift from the Sherlock Holmes hobby.
I've always been surprised and delighted by the generosity of Sherlockians, and these are people that I don't know otherwise from a bar of soap, or people that I only see once in 10 years or whatever. I still remember the late Dr. Fred Kittle.
Oh boy, that's a story.
Inviting Roy and I he and his wife inviting Roy and I into their home, and bringing out all these White Company related collectible material that notebooks, Conan Doyle's notebooks that he had created during his research, all kinds of stuff, and just helping us to do the research with his unique material that we needed. And I remember just this past January in New York, my first time at the New York weekend in about 10 years. And you, Steve, and Mark Gagan were just so generous in terms of inviting me along to places and making sure that I was included. It was something really special. And there's moments like that through my entire experience of Sherlock Holmes and the Sherlockian movement. So it's been nothing but good for me.
Yeah, it's a great thing. Well, guys, I hate to say it, but we are out of time. I mean, this is the kind of conversation you could sit around in a hotel room at the end of a Sherlockian weekend and talk till 2 a.m. But we don't have that luxury right now. So we'll have to draw it to a close. But I want to thank you both.
Thank you
very much.
Thank you
For joining us.
Hey, Doug, we'll be talking, Doug.
We will, absolutely. Yeah. Take care, Roy.
Take care of yourself. Thanks, Steve.
Yes, thanks, Roy. Thanks, Doug. And I'll probably have to have you on again. There's still things to talk about, so hang in there. And I hope we all see each other again sooner than later.
That'd be great.
Great.
Thank you.
And that's it for this episode of the Fortnightly Dispatch, brought to you by the Baker Street Irregulars. I want to thank everybody. Again, I know I'm a broken record. I want to thank you again for all your kind comments, all your encouragement. Believe me, it means a lot. Just post your comments, your suggestions on whatever Facebook page you happen to see this on, or on the Facebook page, which is getting more and more subscribers all the time, and you too can subscribe. Be sure to come back for our next show. You know, one of my goals on this show, and one of my great joys, is getting to visit with some of my favorite Sherlockians. And one of my favorite Sherlockians, who I made a point of getting to know, and I think you need to know her too, will be with us next week. So until then, take care.